I thought the past was buried in my crying/100 million lakeside estate. The life I built from scratch gleamed with victories, but scars of abandonment still lingered. Then the doorbell rang. On the screen, the very family who once called me a burden now stood outside. A mixture of awe and desperation. The family that once threw me away had come crawling back. I was 36 years old when I realized success could feel like an empty skyscraper. My name is Clara Bennett. And on paper, my life looked flawless. CEO of a fast-growing tech company. Celebrated in magazines. Invited to speak at conferences around the world. Yet in the quiet of my corner office, with glass walls overlooking the city, I often found myself staring at a single photograph on my desk. The picture was faded. Edges curling. Faces blurred with time. It was supposed to be a family portrait. But to me, it always felt more like a reminder of absence than of belonging. I'd sit there after long meetings. My team gone home. The city humming below. And I'd catch myself tracing the outlines of the people in that photo. My parents' stiff posture. My sister's perfect smile. And then me. The child who never quite fit into the frame. I wanted to believe I was part of something whole. But the truth whispered differently each time I looked at it. One night, exhaustion pressing down on me, I let my mind drift back decades. 2. The first time I realized the cost of being invisible, I was 10 years old. Standing on a small wooden stage in my school auditorium. I had just finished a speech that had won first prize in the county competition. The applause was polite. Scattered at first. Then louder as teachers clapped. My heart pounded with pride and hope. I scanned the rows of folding chairs. Looking for my parents. Their seats were empty, completely empty. But there was one face shining through the crowd. My grandmother. Margaret. Leaning forward. Eyes glistening. Clapping as if her hands could make up for the silence of everyone else. She mouthed the words. "You are my pride. Clara. Never forget that." In that moment, I felt two truths collide. The joy of being seen. And the ache of realizing it came from only one person. I held on to her smile like a lifeline that day. Because even as a child, I sensed it, the family I was born into had never truly chosen me. And no amount of trophies, ribbons, or perfect grades could change that. The summer I turned 11 was supposed to be a memory of sunshine and ocean waves. Instead, it became the moment I understood exactly where I stood in that family. I can still hear my mother's voice, Helen's voice sharp and dismissive as she shut the car door. "The car's full. Clara. Maybe next time." I stood on the driveway, my small suitcase by my feet, watching as the car rolled away with laughter spilling out the windows. My sister pressed her face against the glass, waving without meaning it. I waved back, though my throat ached with a lump I couldn't swallow. The gravel crunched under the tires. And then silence. Just me, the empty house, and the echo of their absence. I ran upstairs to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass, straining for one last glimpse, but the car was gone. Swallowed by the curve of the road, I stayed there long after, staring at nothing. My reflection ghosted on the glass. That was when Margaret found me. She didn't ask questions. She never did. Instead, she wrapped her arms around me, her sweater smelling faintly of lavender and old books, and pressed something cool into my palm. It was a delicate silver bracelet, thin but sturdy, engraved with a simple pattern. Alongside it, she placed a small wooden box. "Whenever you feel left behind," she whispered, "open this. And remember, you are never truly alone. You carry me with you. Always." I nodded, though tears blurred everything, even her kind face. Years later, when Margaret passed, the house was filled with mourners. I sat stiffly as the lawyer read her will. My cousins leaned in, expectant, already calculating inheritances in their heads. When he spoke my name, it was brief, almost perfunctory. $3,000. That was all. I felt the room tilt. Not because of the number, but because I knew Margaret had left me more than any of them could understand. She had given me faith in myself. Still. The humiliation burned. Helen's smirk cut deeper than the words on the page. See, Clara? Even my mother knew you didn't belong. You were just a pity project. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Her tone coated in disdain. My chest hollowed out. But I refused to cry. I stood, every eye on me, and walked out of that house for the last time. I carried nothing but a single suitcase and the wooden box Margaret had given me. It wasn't money, but it was armor. It was proof that someone, at least once in my life, had truly chosen me. When I left Helen's house that night, I didn't just leave behind the walls that had never sheltered me. I left behind the illusion that I belonged anywhere. What came next wasn't glamorous or triumphant, it was survival. Stripped bare. I rented a room in a rundown building on the edge of the city. The kind of place where the wallpaper peeled like old skin, and the radiator groaned louder than the tenants. The air smelled of mildew, and the single window rattled whenever the wind howled. That room became both my refuge and my cage. Most nights I ate instant noodles. The kind that came 3 for $1. I'd boil water on a dented kettle and tell myself that someday I'd have more. On a crooked desk sat an old second-hand computer I had scraped together money to buy. It was slow, loud, and stubborn. But it connected me to the one thing that felt like hope, learning. I stayed up until dawn, teaching myself to code, reading every free manual I could find, and experimenting with designs until my eyes burned. By day, I wore a different mask. I worked as a waitress in a small cafe not far from the university district. The manager barked orders as though every mistake was a personal insult. Customers sometimes snapped their fingers at me, as if I were invisible until they needed a refill. I learned to smile politely while collecting tips that barely covered rent. Each night I came home with sore feet, smelling of coffee and grease, and forced myself back to that flickering computer screen. The rejections came like clockwork. I mailed out resume after resume, only to be told I wasn't qualified, didn't have the right background, or simply never hear back at all. Each no was a reminder that I didn't have family connections to open doors. No father to make introductions. No mother to drop my name in the right circles. I had nothing but grit. And grit doesn't look impressive on paper. There were nights when despair pressed against my chest so heavily I could hardly breathe. I would stare at the bracelet Margaret had given me, turning it over in my hands, hearing her whisper in memory, "You are my pride, Clara." I clung to that like a prayer. I told myself I had survived worse. I had been told I was unwanted, dismissed as charity, forgotten in plain sight. If I could endure that, I could endure rejection letters, cheap food, and long shifts. So every time another envelope came back with bad news, I didn't throw it away. I stacked them in a shoebox under my bed. A reminder, not of failure, but of defiance. Each no would someday make the yes matter more. And in the silence of that shabby room, with nothing but the hum of an old computer and the faint glow of the screen, I whispered a vow to myself: I will not be extinguished. Suddy's earnings of diddly blaze stick. That conviction became the fuel that carried me forward. Opportunity didn't come to me with fanfare. It came quietly, almost by accident, in the middle of an ordinary shift at the cafe. I was balancing a tray of coffee cups when I overheard a conversation at one of the corner tables. A professor from the university was lecturing a student about software design. I couldn't help myself. Without thinking, I corrected a small detail he had misstated. My voice cracked from nerves, but the logic was clear. He looked up. "I'm surprised," then asked me to explain, so I did, rattling off everything I'd been teaching myself late at night in that tiny room. His name was Dr. Evelyn Cho, and instead of dismissing me like so many others, she leaned in. Intrigued. After my shift ended, She stayed behind and asked if I'd ever considered formal training. I laughed bitterly and told her about my rejections. About the lack of money. About being a nobody with nothing but an old computer and stubborn willpower. She studied me with eyes that felt sharper than any resume filter. And then she smiled. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said. "Come to my house for dinner this weekend. I think we have much to talk about." In Jurity, that dinner changed everything. Sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table, surrounded by the warmth of home-cooked food and laughter from her husband and children, I felt a pang I hadn't expected. It was the ache of belonging, something I had craved all my life. She didn't pity me, she respected me. Over dessert, she shared her own story of being an immigrant's daughter, working nights to pay for school, facing doors that were always half shut. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider telling excuses. I felt like someone who mattered. Evelyn began mentoring me, guiding me through projects, introducing me to people who cared more about drive than pedigree. She gave me structure where before I had only had chaos. Her belief in me filled cracks I hadn't known were so deep. And then came Nathan Brooks. He was young for an investor, not much older than I was, with a reputation for taking risks others avoided. I met him at a small networking event Evelyn had nudged me to attend. I was nervous, clutching my slides, certain no one would take me seriously. When it was my turn to present, my voice shook, but my conviction was steady. I spoke not just about software but about the hunger to create something secure, something that couldn't be taken away like so much else in life had been. Most investors glanced at their phones. Nathan didn't. He locked eyes with me the entire time. Afterward, he walked over and said, "You've been through hell, haven't you? That's why I believe in you. Not because of your product, though it's good, but because of your fire." His words startled me. He offered to back my idea with seed money. And I realized for the first time, someone outside of Evelyn truly saw me. Not as a charity case, but as a fighter worth betting on. Between Evelyn's guidance and Nathan's trust, I discovered something more valuable than funding or opportunity. I discovered the beginnings of a chosen family. People who didn't share my blood but shared something stronger, faith in who I was becoming. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I belonged somewhere. Late one night, when the city had quieted and even the hum of traffic seemed softer, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring at the wooden box Margaret had given me. For months I had avoided opening it, as though the contents inside might rewrite who I was in ways I wasn't ready to face. But after the long days of struggle and the flicker of hope Evelyn and Nathan had given me, I realized I could no longer run from the truth of where I came from. My hands trembled as I slid the lid open. The first thing I saw was the silver bracelet, still polished despite its age. My name, Clara. It was engraved delicately along the inside, as though someone had cared enough to imagine it would be cherished for a lifetime. I held it against my wrist, and for a moment, it almost felt like a mother's touch. Beneath it lay a bundle of folded letters, their paper yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted and elegant, filled with words of longing, regret, and promises never fulfilled. I couldn't read more than a few lines before my vision blurred with tears. At the very bottom was a document, carefully preserved, a birth certificate. My breath caught in my throat as I read the name written in bold letters under Mother. It wasn't Helen. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was a stranger. Yet at the same time, she was the root of everything. The silence in the room grew louder, wrapping around me with a mix of fear and anticipation. For the first time, I wasn't just an abandoned child or an unwanted burden. I was the daughter of a woman whose story had been hidden from me. I spent hours that night pacing, reading, rereading, whispering the name on the certificate like it was a secret prayer. Questions flooded my mind. Why had she given me up? Did she still think of me? Was she even alive? The uncertainty gnawed at me. But instead of collapsing under its weight, I felt a strange surge of courage. I had survived too much to shy away now. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I found myself in a cramped office downtown. The kind with filing cabinets stacked to the ceiling and blinds that hadn't been dusted in years. Across the desk sat a private investigator. His face worn, but his eyes sharp. I placed the box in front of him and explained what I had found. He listened quietly, then nodded. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "But I can promise we'll uncover something." "Oh, Genaza." As I left his office, the weight on my chest lifted just slightly. I didn't know what answers lay ahead, or if I'd even be able to bear them once revealed. But I knew I was finally walking toward the truth, step by step. For the first time, my past wasn't a chain dragging me down. It was a mystery calling me forward. And I was ready to follow it wherever it might lead. I still remember the morning Shield Tech officially launched our first product. The city skyline was drenched in golden light. And for once I didn't wake up in a cramped apartment with peeling paint. I woke up in a hotel suite. The kind I used to walk past in my waitress uniform. Too afraid to even step inside. Now, the name Clara Hayes was printed across glossy invitations, paired with the bold Shield Tech logo. The launch felt surreal, like a movie montage playing out in real time. Cameras flashed as we unveiled our technology, the device gleaming under the spotlights. Journalists leaned forward in their seats, hungry for the next Silicon Valley success story. I watched Nathan's grin from across the stage, Evelyn's proud nod from the front row, and for the first time, I felt as though all the sacrifices had crystallized into something undeniable. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages I couldn't even begin to answer. Headlines popped up one after another. Shield Tech disrupts the market. From waitress to visionary CEO. Clara Hayes, the face of the future. News anchors repeated my name as though it had always belonged in the spotlight. When just a few years ago, it was nothing more than a forgotten child's. A week later, my face was on the cover of a national magazine. I stood in line at the airport, barely recognizing the woman on the glossy page. The photo showed me polished, confident, unstoppable. The article called me a pioneer, someone who had turned tragedy into triumph. Strangers began to recognize me on the street, some shyly asking for autographs, others telling me I inspired their daughters. I can't deny the pride that swelled inside me. For years, I had been dismissed, overlooked, even humiliated. And now, the very world that once ignored me seemed to lean in closer, eager to hear my story. There was a sweetness in that reversal. In a quiet victory I carried like a hidden medal. At the same time, it was exhausting. The interviews, the late-night meetings, the endless cycle of appearances. My calendar no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the machine of success. Yet whenever fatigue threatened to overtake me, I thought about the long nights of eating instant noodles in that damp apartment. And I kept pushing forward. That season of my life was a blur of red carpets, press conferences, and boardroom triumphs. Shield Tech was no longer just a dream scribbled in notebooks. It was real, powerful, undeniable. Investors lined up. Journalists chased us. Competitors scrambled to catch up. And there I was at the center of it all. A girl who had once been forgotten, now standing tall beneath the blinding lights. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I had finally arrived. That maybe, just maybe, this was the summit I had been climbing toward my entire life. Success came with a strange kind of silence. My new home was a sprawling glass and stone mansion on a hill, the kind of place I once thought only existed in glossy magazines. The rooms stretched endlessly, each corner furnished with elegance, each wall hung with expensive art chosen by designers. But at night, when the staff went home and the lights dimmed, it felt less like a home and more like a museum where I was the only exhibit. I often found myself sitting at the massive dining table that could seat 20, with only one plate set before me. The food was always exquisite, prepared by chefs, plated with perfection, but it never tasted the way Evelyn's simple pasta did. Or even how instant noodles tasted when I used to eat them half asleep over my laptop. It wasn't the food that was missing. It was the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the comfort of knowing someone cared enough to sit beside me. One evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my phone, just to feel connected. That's when I saw it. A photo on social media of Laura, my foster sister, standing in a white dress. She was radiant, smiling arm in arm with her new husband. My chest tightened as I swiped through picture after picture of the wedding. Family gathered, friends cheering, a dance floor lit with joy. And not once did anyone think to call me. I stared at the screen until the images blurred. It was as though I had been erased from their lives, as if I had never existed in theirs at all. Memories I had buried clawed their way back, birthdays forgotten, secrets whispered behind closed doors. The way Laura's smile had always been reserved for someone else. I thought I had grown past that pain. But success has a cruel way of amplifying the echoes of loneliness. I was supposed to be on top of the world. That's what everyone said. Yet sitting in that cavernous dining room, scrolling through photos of a celebration I was never invited to, I felt smaller than I had in years. The silence in the house grew heavier, pressing down on me until it felt hard to breathe. I told myself I didn't need them, that Shield Tech was my family now, that recognition and applause should be enough. But in the quiet moments, the truth broke through. Triumph without belonging is nothing more than a decorated cage. Nights blurred together in that way. I would return from meetings, peel off the designer dress, and let it puddle on the floor as I sat staring out the window. The city glowed with life below me. Millions of windows lit with dinners, conversations, bedtime stories. Behind those lights were families messy, imperfect, but real. I had everything I thought I wanted. Yet the one thing I had always longed for remained just out of reach. The emptiness was sharp, almost physical. Success had given me a stage, but no one waiting for me in the wings. Christmas has a way of magnifying whatever's in your heart. If you're lonely, the season makes it ache worse. But if you're surrounded by warmth, even the smallest gathering feels like a miracle. That year, I decided I was done staring at glittering lights from behind cold glass windows. I wanted to create something different, something mine. So, for the first time in my life, I hosted Christmas in my own home, not a grand gala, not some lavish show for investors, but a small dinner where only the people who truly mattered were invited. Evelyn came with her husband, Nathan, and a few of the Shield Tech team who had stood beside me through every storm. We strung lights across the banister ourselves, clumsy but laughing. We laid mismatched ornaments on the tree. The smell of roasted turkey mixed with cinnamon candles filled the air. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. As we sat around the dining table, the same table that had felt so suffocating when I ate alone, something shifted. The space wasn't hollow anymore. It echoed with laughter, stories, inside jokes. Nathan carved the turkey while Evelyn teased him for cutting it too thick. One of the engineers tried to play piano in the corner, missing more notes than he hit. And still everyone clapped along. My glass of wine tasted sweeter simply because I raised it next to theirs. I remember looking around that room and realizing my definition of family had finally changed. Bloodlines had failed me. Old ties had left scars. But here, in this imperfect gathering of colleagues turned friends, I felt accepted. No conditions. No comparisons. No silent exclusions. Just belonging. For years, I thought success would heal the holes left by rejection. But that night, I understood the truth. It wasn't the magazine covers or the awards that mattered. It was Evelyn passing me mashed potatoes like we were kids again. Nathan asking me about childhood dreams, as though he wanted to know the girl behind the CEO. It was the warmth of people who chose me. Not out of obligation, but out of love. At one point, I slipped away from the table and stood near the window. Outside, snow fell quietly, blanketing the world in white. Inside, my home pulsed with light and laughter. For the first time, I whispered to myself, I belong. In this speeding they was might no telever, into Rusper side percent, and I believed it. The glow of Christmas lingered for weeks in my heart. That small dinner had given me a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. But peace has a way of being tested. And mine didn't last long. It was a Thursday night. Cold and quiet. When the knock came at the gate, at first, I thought it was just a late delivery or one of the staff returning from errands. But when I stepped onto the balcony and looked down, I froze, standing there, framed by the golden light spilling from the lanterns. Was my foster family. Richard, my foster father, stood stiffly in his long coat, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp with calculation. Beside him was Marjorie, his wife, clutching her purse, as if it contained more than belongings. It carried her pride, her excuses, maybe even her guilt. And behind them, half in the shadows, was Laura, my foster sister, the one whose wedding I hadn't been invited to. She wore a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, I didn't breathe. My hand tightened on the balcony railing, as memories rushed in shouts at the dinner table. Cold shoulders on birthdays. Whispers that I was never truly theirs. And yet here they were, at my gate, looking up at my home like it was some kind of prize. The guard turned to me for instructions. Waiting. My first instinct was to send them away, to shut the door the same way they had shut me out for years. But something in me wanted to face them. To stand on steady ground this time. Let them in, I said quietly. When they entered the courtyard, the air shifted. It wasn't warmth or reunion, it was tension. Like two worlds colliding after decades apart. Richard spoke first, his voice carrying that same authority I remembered from childhood. Clara, he said, almost formal. You've built quite a life for yourself. If like the rage of was of the comped, I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. I have, in was mindy 8 mins, and there's persons with enzer. Marjorie gave a small laugh. Nervous. Brittle. We've been meaning to visit for so long. Dear. But, well, life gets in the way. In was mindy 8 mins, and there's persons with enzer. Life. That word stung. As if forgetting me at family holidays or cutting me out of milestones was just life getting in the way. Laura finally stepped forward, her smile trembling. You look amazing. We've seen you in the papers. On television. You've done so well. In was mindy 8 mins, and there's persons with enzer. I searched her face for sincerity, but all I saw was unease. Why are you here? I asked finally. My voice didn't waver, though my heart pounded in my chest. They exchanged glances. I saw hesitation flicker, but behind it, something else, hunger, ambition, maybe desperation. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Richard cleared his throat, his tone careful now, almost rehearsed. We thought it was time to reconnect, to mend old wounds. In the manser, the words sounded polished, but his eyes betrayed him. They weren't here for healing. They wanted something. I stood taller, letting the quiet linger, forcing them to sit in their own discomfort. The house around me felt like armor solid, earned, undeniable. I was no longer the girl at their mercy. I was a woman with power, and they knew it. Suspense hung between us. Unspoken but undeniable. Whatever they had come for. I was ready this time. We moved into the great room, its tall windows glowing with city lights. I motioned for them to sit, though every part of me wanted to remain standing. Unshaken, they lowered themselves onto the leather couches, awkward in the luxury that surrounded them. Marjorie leaned forward first, smoothing her skirt like she was preparing for a performance. Clara. We didn't come here lightly. Things haven't been easy for us. Her voice quivered, then sharpened. Richard lost a major investment. The house needs repairs. Medical bills are piling up. We thought, well, given how successful you've become, you might be able to help. It's maybe could it. I said nothing. Just folded my hands in my lap. Laura jumped in quickly, her words spilling out. It's not charity. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. We calculated. About $1.5 million would get us out of the hole. She glanced at me like I was a banker holding her loan approval. $1.5 million. The number rang in the air like a bell. Still, I stayed silent. Instead, I picked up the remote and pressed a button. A giant screen descended slowly from the ceiling. Their eyes followed it, puzzled. Then the images appeared: birthday parties where my chair was empty, Thanksgiving dinners where I wasn't invited, Laura's wedding photos beaming across the screen with no trace of me in sight. The room was filled with the soundless ache of my absence. I had saved these clippings, not to torture myself, but to remind me of what had been denied, and now they were forced to see it too. Richard shifted uncomfortably. His face hardened. Pride wrestling with shame. Finally, he said, no matter what you show us, we still raised you. We gave you a roof, food, and education. Without us, you wouldn't be here. It is Yrs. I turned my gaze to him. Steady and cold. Raised me, you called me your charity case. You made sure I never forgot I wasn't truly yours. Every kindness came with a price tag. Don't rewrite history now. It is Yrs. His jaw tightened. Marjorie opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting anywhere but the screen. Laura sank lower in her seat, her face pale. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. You want $1.5 million? No. That answer is simple. But I will do something. Not for you. For the children who might one day feel as I did. Mrs. Avenary. I picked up a folder from the coffee table and slid it toward them. Inside were documents for a new scholarship fund in my name. This fund will cover education for underprivileged kids, including your children, Laura, if they ever need it. That's where my support goes. Toward a future. Not to patch up the mistakes of the past. Enderfing. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating silence. Richard's face flushed with anger. But he didn't speak. Marjorie pressed her lips tight, fighting back whatever argument she had rehearsed. Laura's eyes brimmed with something like regret. But she, too, said nothing. Finally, Richard stood abruptly, his coat flaring. Come on, he muttered. His voice clipped. We're done here. These came up at little fur. The three of them moved toward the door. Their footsteps echoed through the grand hall like fading thunder. For a long moment, I stood still, the air in the room trembling with everything unsaid. When the door shut behind them, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My shoulders dropped. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Justice wasn't always loud or vengeful. Sometimes it was simply the strength to say no and mean it. The house was quiet after they left. Too quiet. Like the walls themselves were exhaling after holding in years of tension. I thought that would be the end of it. But life has a way of giving you one more truth when you least expect it. A few days later, Detective Harris appeared at my door. He carried a slim envelope in his hand, and his expression was softer than I'd ever seen. Clara, he said gently. We found your biological mother. She passed away last winter. But she left something behind for you. And it will so verstehen to have. And remind. He placed the envelope in my hands. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a worn leather journal. Its pages yellowed, the corners bent from use. My mother's handwriting filled the first page in looping, deliberate strokes. I took it out to the garden behind the house. where the sun poured over the roses and the air smelled of lavender. I sat beneath the oak tree and opened the journal. Her words reached across time and absence. Fragile yet strong, stories of her struggles, her hopes, and the way she had thought of me every day of her life. She had written about how giving me up was her greatest heartbreak, but also her greatest act of love. She prayed I would grow into a woman strong enough to survive in ways she couldn't. Tears blurred the ink as I read. Yet I found myself smiling through them. For years, I had wondered if I had been abandoned because I wasn't enough. Now I knew I had been loved fiercely. Just in silence. I didn't hear them at first. But then Evelyn and Nathan walked into the garden. They didn't say a word. Just came to my side. Evelyn placed her hand on my shoulder. Warm and steady. Nathan rested his hand over mine, grounding me. I closed the journal carefully, pressing it to my chest. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in soft gold. For once, I didn't feel the ache of what was missing. I felt the fullness of what I had, with a voice that was barely more than a whisper. I said, I finally found my family. It's not rated no type self. The words settled into the evening air. Not as a declaration, but as a quiet truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking backward with longing or forward with fear. I was here, surrounded by people who chose me. People I chose in return. And that was enough. Healing doesn't come in thunderclaps or grand gestures. It comes in moments like this sunlight on your face. The weight of a loved one's hand. The echo of a mother's words finally reaching you. It comes in the peace of knowing you are no longer alone.